and talk about how everybody in the team's season went.
All right, Dan, what do you got going on with your shirt there?
Well, this? You like that? Possum hand catching champ. 142 confirmed catches. There's actually like 300 catches, but they're only confirmed if somebody's there to see it.
Or if they're on video.
Yeah.
I think I confirmed a half dozen of those at least. So, all right. We'll get going. All right, well, welcome everyone. We're going to do our 2018 season in review. We got our hunting journal up, and we'll kind of scroll through the time frame, starting with early season and work our way all the way to the bitter end of another fun season. So, first off, I guess let's talk about early season. First entry I got in the journal is 9/15, so opening weekend. Thoughts? What went on for everyone?
I had a pretty boring opener.
Not feeling too good today. I woke up and had like flu-like symptoms and a nasty head cold. I'm all congested. Felt like I was gonna puke all day. Kind of day you call in sick for. But wouldn't miss hunting on opening day.
I mean, I didn't see much early on. Matter of fact, my whole season was kind of slow.
And then I got my dark blue jeans and my flip-flops, my bedtime slippers. And that giant shows up. He's gonna die out of sheer respect, seeing how well dressed I am.
I mean, in comparison to last year, this year I got a buck. Last year I had constant action and ended up with no buck at the end, but had a real fun season. This year was pretty boring for me, especially early on. But I did kind of target bigger deer this year, and there was a lot of deer I could have shot that I didn't. Some of them I would have shot if they walked underneath me, but you get a glimpse of them, you see them, and then you go target something else and you just let them be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hilariously enough, my early season didn't even start until October because, I didn't get into it with you and Mario and stuff until later in the season because we were busy trying to, I hadn't been deer hunting a lot and we were busy trying to get sticks and stuff out the door. So for me, there wasn't an opening weekend. My opening weekend was that second week in October when I went out with Mario and we went hunting, and it was awesome. And we'll get to that later on.
I guess our biggest thing with early season for me was with the trip with Joe to Minnesota.
Yeah.
That was the funnest trip. The
Yeah,
funnest thing. It was just a great time.
So why don't we talk about strategy behind that? That was over a year in the making, I would say, because there was conversations and talks about doing a public event like that, a public land challenge per se, and getting together with the public hunting guys and doing something in that capacity. So I guess what was your and Joe's thought process going into that, going onto some virgin ground?
My thought was to really look for public land over there. As soon as I found out where we were going, it was to find out, from people I knew, like I contacted a forester that's on the site, who's a friend of mine, contacted some people I know in that area. I think Joe did the same, and we found out some properties, and I really, and what I focused on was with the conversations with Joe, was that we needed to find swamps because it was early season. We knew they were having a good acorn crop, and we wanted to get down low where acorns were limited. Because you get up in the hills, there's acorns everywhere. Those deer just get up and feed, and it's kind of pot luck. You got to get them to move far enough and stuff. So my idea was we found swamps in there, and we'd focus on the swamps that were close to the base camp, and find oak trees down there, find little oak islands and such. And that was my thought process going in. Was that yours?
Well, mine was a little different going in. I had a little bit of experience with that particular area. So we initially went to a spot, checked out a spot. It didn't look very good, and then from there the focus was acorns at that point. So,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
makes
you're right.
sense.
Yep.
It makes sense because, I mean, so many people want to bang their head up against, you know, they might have a target buck that's living on a hillside, and then they just run around that whole hillside, and you're never going to get them. You kind of got to go where you know you can get it done, right?
Yeah, and the point of it is you got to be versatile. You know, some guys are just hill guys. Some guys are just swamp guys or whatever.
Yeah.
I was looking at the time of the year and what was going to be going on and how I deal with that in the areas I hunt. But I was kind of wrong because when we got into those swamps, what happened?
They were dry.
There were no oak
They
trees.
moved up into the hills.
Yeah, there was no oak trees. There was no oak islands. The islands had poplars and stuff on them. They had maples on them. There was no oak trees under. All the oaks were up in the hills.
Yeah.
And then there was guys having a little bit of luck up in the hills in the group, but I still didn't see a lot of action in those hills. And I just thought we had to get someplace that had the situation that we could manipulate, that it's got what we need. And I thought there's got to be a swamp around that's got oak trees in the swamp. So we made some phone calls to some friends, and one of them pointed out a large marsh that had cattail islands. And then me and Joe had to have a discussion whether we wanted to go there or not, because it was, what, a 3-hour drive?
Yeah. Yeah.
That was insane.
Yeah.
So then the thing was to find the right area in the swamp. We had to kick around. We lost probably a day trying to
Oh,
figure
yeah.
out where to
Yeah.
go.
All
And-
this stuff close to the roads was garbage.
Yeah, there was too much pressure. We got into stuff that looked good,
Yeah.
had good sign, but it looks like as of opening day, pressure moved in. And you'd find a spot that looks good, look up, there's a tree stand. And I'm sure a lot of people have gone through that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when we did get in a good area, it was to stage our way back. And we're taking turns going back on the islands, finding the oaks.
Yeah.
I just got out to this island. Dan and Ted are actually way out. They're out there on that island right there. So what I'm gonna do here, I'm just gonna count that little thing there as a loss, and I'm gonna skirt the tip of this. And it looks like bedding around that point, and I'm gonna stay. I'm gonna stay on the downside of it.
So I noticed in following along with the videos that you guys obviously had maps that you printed out of areas that you looked at. So maybe talk through that process a little. If someone is taking a trip out of state, I mean, for you guys, this was a trip out of state, and how you approached. So you called some friends, you got ideas. How did you start going about grabbing maps, and what were you really looking for on the maps? I mean, this is a typical process that you guys go through, you know, when you're investigating any property. But I think people want to hear, you know, that process of you looking at a map and what are the key things you're looking for on it.
I was looking at swamps, so islands stand out in them.
Yeah.
I was looking for oak islands. I was looking for points that go out that are oak points, stuff like that. We did have some topos of hills in case we went into the hills. And Joe had the one property we wanted to look at the hills. We were looking at and you were looking at that.
Right.
And we went there, and that just didn't have what we wanted either. But I focus on those paper maps you're seeing because I'm old school.
Yeah.
Number one, I can't see a phone screen. and
little
number
phone.
two, my phone won't do it. I got a flip phone,
Yeah.
which I need to upgrade. Then that's where Joe really came in handy, because I seen how much extra we could do with his phone and with you know, a system where you can see if you're on public land and all that stuff. You know,
Yeah.
it's so much better than my following a paper map.
Yeah, and you don't have to worry about how you're going to get back, right? Normally, with just the compass, you couldn't have just taken the compass and headed north to the vehicle. You had to go around and stuff, so that's where the phone really came in handy, because
Yeah, and it
You
was
didn't-
interesting getting out of some of those swamps. And you're back 3 miles and stuff, and you're following an edge, and you miss a turn,
Yeah.
and you end up walking an extra mile. I mean, it's a big deal.
Man, it's a long way out of here navigating with a compass. Those guys were even deeper than me. And looking back, I don't even see the lights yet, and I can see back about a mile to where I came out from. Teddy's earning that internship.
Oh yeah.
Well, I think that's an interesting point to bring up for anyone that's getting into this. I mean, this gets brought up a lot about, what attracts people to hunting and the outdoors in general. People are, in general, I think, are interested in a little bit of adrenaline junkies and why people might participate in certain activities, extreme sports or even video games for that matter. They get an adrenaline rush out of it. If you want to give yourself an adrenaline rush, take a map, navigate your way 3-4 miles back into a remote swamp, and then when it gets dark, navigate your way out.
Can you see him? He's paralleling us like 20 yards straight downwind. Gets any closer, you'll be able to reach out and grab him. Can you see him? Right, in some place I've never been before.
Right.
Ever.
There's a certain amount of that'll man you up. And it's fun. There's an accomplishment just in doing that in itself, and I think some of that woodsmanship that comes into doing that, that's all part of it, Not only do you have to be confident that you're going out into your spot where you think there might be a potential buck that you can kill, but then just confident that you're going out into an area and you can hunt it. And I think it helps when you're starting out to pair up with a friend and buddy hunt in that system.
Yeah, I hear so many people that are terrified of being out there someplace they don't know in the dark. Because they contact me and they're like, how do you handle that? I get those messages all the time. It's something that they don't want to post publicly, but they want to know. And really, what's the worst could happen? I mean, you hit water or something, you turn around, right? You go some other direction. There's really not a lot more than you have to walk half a night to get out. I mean, it's not that big of a deal. It's more of a hindrance. But if you just go out and you start doing that, you hunt those spots over and over again, after a while it becomes second nature. I mean, how many times have we been out in the swamps where we don't know where the hell we are, and we laugh about it.
Yeah, you really have to laugh and kind of embrace the experience. And you, Rob, you've done, when you were younger, you did a lot of remote camping hunts up north in Black River Falls.
It's the same thing. You're in cattails higher than you can see, and you got your dad. Well, for me, it was my dad. But it's like, all right, find your way out. Here's the compass. And like Dan said, you may walk half a night, but you're gonna find a road. You're gonna find a road. You're gonna find land. You're gonna find somebody, and you can get out. And the more you do it, the more confident you are in doing that. I mean, I would say that that's one of the easiest things when Mario and I started scouting this fall, and I really hadn't hunted beast style, but we're just wandering around the swamp, and it's like, okay, well, yeah, here's north, here's east, we're gonna go this way, and we'll be out. Here's the property line, because I just looked at the map. The more you do it, the more confident you get in it, and I think that's the only way you can do it. It's just just getting out there and doing it, so you feel more comfortable, in being in that environment.
So back to some of those strategies early season, I mean, definitely food source. So one of the key food sources that you guys identified early on was remote oak trees on islands. And obviously you also recognized that there were oak trees in the hills. Now the hills were a little bit more difficult challenge because if those deer are bedding in close proximity to those oak trees, they're going to be on those points, on those changes in elevation. So as you access them, either coming up a draw or perpendicular to them, those deer have a lot of advantage with sight, sound, smell, and the hills can be challenging. Now, we like the swamp points because there's a lot of cases where wind, you can play a wind to your advantage, you can get in on the backside of those islands, and you can creep in and be quiet and get in close proximity to bedding.
Well, here's the big thing is, the huge differences in this ocean of oaks on a hillside where there's points and stuff. They can get up from bedding in just feet.
Yep.
But when it's in the swamp, they're not bedding in the oaks. The oaks are open. Right. It's an open island. I mean, where we were hunting on those islands, like a park.
Yep.
And you can take a look at the shape of that island. And here's something we haven't really discussed a lot. And me and Joe discussed this as we were planning. Look at how that island lays out. This is probably the bedding. Look at this little satellite island here. They're probably going to be sitting there. They're going to get up there, come to this island when it's got the big oaks, and eat. So we don't want to access through that little island. We want to purposely access a different way and not get the wind over there. And then you can look at the shape of an island, how it tapers down. You're going to say that taper down point is where the bedding's going to be. So we're always looking at how they're going to bed on there. but they're not bedding in the oaks. They have to travel to the oaks. And it's a close proximity, so it's going to be in daylight. And they've never had pressure at that time frame of the year from humans.
Right.
People just aren't going out back to when it's 80 degrees out and in early September and hunting that stuff.
Right.
I mean, I think that our plan worked out great. It's just that we had that stumbling block at the beginning. And what you're going to find is a lot of people can't get past that stumbling block because, well, this is where I was going hunting.
Yeah.
We literally drove further to get to the spot where we determined we needed to be than we drove from home to get to the camp.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, and that's where you got to be willing to kind of do something more extreme or change it up on the fly. But good key points, orientation of those islands in proximity to where the predominant wind is. Because when you're looking at a map, it's not like the map has the exact wind, but you can go online and you could look at historically, technology, use technology to your advantage. You can look historically at what the predominant winds are for that area. And then you can make the assumption that if this satellite island is here, the big island's here, and how it lays out.
zoom in, see if you can see any trails.
Yep.
And the one thing to mention too is on those islands, we figured out really quick, you get one sit on each island, and you have to pick the right spot on the island. So if you just get onto the island and you set up, and the first good acorn tree is 100 yards down the island, he gets out of his bed, and he stops at that one acorn tree, and you're not going to get a crack at him until it's...
I had that, but the buck wasn't
Yep.
a shooter.
Yep.
I mean, it was close to a shooter, but it came out to the first tree,
Yep.
and here I sit. And if that would have been a shooter, and I'm not launching an arrow 50 yards.
Right.
Well, and you mentioned that a lot in your classes this spring too, while pushing that distance, getting closer, because they're going to stop at that first tree, and then it's like you're going to wait 5 hours for them to get closer to you.
A lot of that is
You know?
studying a map so you have an idea where you think they're going to access that island, and then your access into there.
Yeah.
You know, and if you, a lot of guys will tell me, oh, I got it great, I'm just going to access by boat. There's a river goes right past the island. Well, it's fine and dandy if that works. But you have to look at how the deer are bedding there, how the wind is, what's going to happen if you go in that way. So you really have to have a plan because you're getting in close quarters.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the time we kill bucks on islands, we're within 50, 75 yards of that bed.
Yeah. And recognize that, I know you guys take extra precautions with this, that when you get into that kill zone and within that 75, 50 yards, I mean, it's time to lock everything down and be uber quiet. I know I've seen you say that multiple times where, you silence any sort of recording if you're doing anything on camera, or, you're going very slow and particular about how your movements are within that short distance. Because, I think what people have to realize too is the pursuit of perfection. If every time out isn't going to be perfect, you're going to run into those scenarios where you're tripping and stumbling and falling, you make noise, and maybe you bust a deer out. But you do that a couple times, and then you start to realize where they were set up and how they were set up, and you can learn off of that.
Yeah, I really, on that trip, when we got into that big marsh, I've been doing that day after day, I really started to feel my age. I could see an advantage Joe had. And if I could speak for Joe, I think I know what one of his biggest stumbling blocks on that hunt was, if you mind,
Yeah, go ahead. I'm curious.
was my stink. we were literally not
Dance
showering or anything, and I smelled so bad it made my eyes water. I really felt for Joe. We got to the hotel room, and he can back me up on this. I took my boots off, and all my toenails fell off. My feet have been in them boots so long, I literally lost my toenails.
He could have used the boot dryer. that was an option.
That was an option. He chose not to.
Dale add that to his Amazon wish list for everyone.
Yes, boot dryer. So yeah, I think early season, if I look back and we can get into Joe's hunt too and kind of how that played out, I focused on Oak Islands as well. I know the first couple hunts that I had were scenarios where we were hopeful due to encounters that we had last year, and the lay of the land was just different. We got into those places and those mature bucks just weren't using those areas. And it could be for a variety of reasons. Maybe people found out about it, they were pressured early, we've seen that happen in the past.
Or the bucks are dead.
Right, or the bucks are dead and they weren't living there anymore. That's where those primary bedding areas that are used year after year, they can change, things change.
And that's the thing too, is so many guys get locked in, they find a good island, they kill a good buck, like they go into their first sit and they're like, oh, like Joe, you killed that buck on that island. So now all of a sudden you make an annual trip there, you're going there all the time and you're dependent on that. And what happened? All of a sudden there ain't a buck there.
Yeah.
Well, you got to be able to hop around. And in our case, we're trying to find a buck to hunt.
Right.
In your case, because I hunt the same place Mario does, you're trying to find a buck that you know is in there somewhere.
Right.
So you're hopping from island to island to island, but you're not camping out.
Yep.
That's critical. Didn't mean to interrupt you, but
No.
And that was something too that I saw in the hills really quick when you and I, well, all three of us went into the hills, and then we both had that one. You took a crack at him. He almost came in on me. I went back 2-3 days later, and it was like a ghost town in there.
Yeah.
You get one crack, and that's it.
yeah, then you got to move to the next section
Yep.
of hills. Yep.
Yeah, and that's how sensitive some of those areas are. You really do get one sit, and then they know you're there because they get pressured year after year, and a lot of people are like, oh, I can walk this property as kind of a pre-season scout, and you're really doing more damage than you are good. You're better in going in. If you didn't get a chance in the off season like now to do any spring scouting, you're better off going in sort of blind and setting up on maps and information like that because you're not going to pressure the area. At times versus going in and walking an area and not hunting it, leaving and then coming back.
I
and
guess
hunting
that's
it later,
dependent.
You know.
I know situations where you'd be better off walking it and then going back and.
Yeah. Well,
But for the most part, you're right. I like that catching them completely off guard because you give them one inkling something's up, and a mature buck gets really tough to hunt.
yeah. So yeah, really my encounter the first week of the season was with that 9-pointer on one of the Oak Islands. If I would say tactically the advantage that I had that day, there was probably 20 plus mile-an-hour winds. So the typical access that I would take there is pretty sensitive from the standpoint of you've got to walk through an area where there's bedding around you. And depending on how the wind is blowing and sound, you can disrupt those. Those deer are going to know you're on that island. So I think the biggest advantage I had that day is there were acorns that were dropping. There was a ton of sign once I got on that island that they had been browsing that whole area of oaks. I went in and I set up actually right in the center of the oaks, which literally are like 60 yards off the main point that goes into the bedding to the north. And I think the high wind allowed me to get in there and be quiet because there was actually doe bedding in satellite beds that were just on the fringes of the island that I kicked when I came in just because they saw me because the island's open and flat. But I got up there and sat, and in daylight, that 9-pointer walked right in off of that swamp bedding, came in on the point, spent a little bit of time in that transition, about 10 yards in, and then made a beeline right for where the center cluster of the oaks were. And he actually set up, 12 yards broadside of me, and
Yeah, you had a ton of film of him. He was just under you forever.
yeah, I decided to pass on him. He looked around and he walked and went off, and I actually never saw that deer again after that. I don't know what happened to him, but yeah, that was a cool hunt, and it shows in those situations like that very easily could have been a buck that I would have wanted to shoot, because the bedding out there can hold bigger bucks, but that was the buck that was living there, that told us like, okay, he's the one.
Yeah, but we'd had, previous years we'd had some really good hunts, and
Yeah,
I probably would have let him go at that point in the season too.
yeah. So
But he was a nice buck.
he was a nice buck. He looked a lot nicer when I rewatched the video later on in the year.
They have a tendency to do that.
But you're not getting it.
They have a tendency to get bigger.
So Joe, want to go through the decision of when to go to that island and what happened?
Yeah, where do we start? What part do you want to start at? I mean, so I guess we started, there was the first island that Ted and I hit, and that was the island that had the trail camera on it. And that one island, if I ever hunted out there again, I don't think I would hunt that island again. I mean, unless the sign looked great. It was once you got past that, it seemed to be where the bedding was.
I would, but I would hunt where I hunted the second time where nothing came by.
Where do you mean?
I went around to the backside of that island, and there's a really good point with a lot of big signs coming off.
Oh, no, I'm talking about the first island that Ted and I set up on.
Okay.
Yep. So I wouldn't do it. Yep. But you're correct because what you almost did was you set up a little too short the first time because you couldn't even see what was down further.
Right.
You don't know if something.
And I was taking a guess, yeah.
Yep. but it's kind of exactly what you said. We just kept working back, and we were getting to the point where we were going to be out of islands, and we had to go to a new spot. But the island that I ended up killing on, we figured it was the furthest one on the map.
And then we studied it to figure out where the bedding was.
You could see where the bedding was off of a few different points, and I set up to catch. There's kind of two bedding areas. You could tell where they were on each end of the island, and you could kind of tell where they were coming in. And I actually didn't even see the trail until I got up in the tree that I picked, and I could see the trail right below me, which is where he came in on. From where I was sitting, he was probably bedded, I would say, less than 100 yards from me. And that goes back to what you said. Just as I moved in there, I moved in on the downwind side of the island, just in case anything else was moving around the island and it was going to make its way to me. It wouldn't cut my scent. That way my scent was blowing out into the cattails off the island. And I just moved really slow, because I always look at it too. I mean, just picture a buck laying in its bed, sitting there all kind of glazed over with his eyes not paying attention. If you got a guy that's just tearing through the woods, that movement's something he's going to pick up on, he's going to hear. Versus I just moved really slow, really careful. And I don't think he could see me from where he was, but that's something I'm always thinking about as I move through.
Especially climbing a tree, because it's an ocean of cattails, so you just got to look up. So you got to watch where you're climbing a tree and how you're using cover.
Yep. Yeah, I had a lot of thick cover in that spot.
So why don't you guys talk, so you stage hunted the islands, which is a typical thing that we've said before, where you sort of stage hunt a property. Give areas some sits to see what you see.
Well, one big thing though is in stage hunting that. I think if we would have gotten to those first couple islands and seen nothing, we'd have moved to someplace else in that swamp. We got in and we saw a big sign. We know there's something big in there.
Yep.
Because there was big rubs, high rubs, big tracks, scrapes that were already being used a little bit. We're like, okay, there's a big buck back here. So now it's just a matter of hunting on these islands till we find them.
Yeah. And I saw that big 2.5. It was a pretty good 2.5-year-old opening night, and we knew at least he was in there. At least we would shoot him, right?
Yeah. So that's a good point. Kind of what I was going to ask is the matching the sign to the actual location that you're at, and what triggered in your mind that it was worth taking the several mile walk back to stage hunt it. And so what you talked about, seeing fresh scrapes, large tracks, high rubs.
So the age of the sign, I would say, was the biggest learning experience for me. Like, I got on the first island with Ted the first night, and I'm like, oh, the sign looks great here. And then once I got onto the second island and the third island, and you could really reel it back and compare it to what you saw the first night. So, like, you'd see poop on the first island, but it was dry to the point of maybe last week or something like that.
Week late.
Yep. And at that time of the year, too, you don't have this cold weather where it's harder to look at poop and tell how old it is. But you could literally look at the poop, and when I got onto the island where I killed, I mentioned it in the video, there was some poop that you could tell, I believed it was from that morning, so I knew there was something right in there.
That was my struggle a little bit, was the sign that I hit, like on that island where I hunt, where that buck came at it, that didn't come close enough.
Yep.
There was sign coming in from the island where you killed your buck. That was big sign coming up out of the cattails from that direction. The only thing out there was the island where he killed his buck.
Yeah.
Coming out, and I could tell that the rubs were like a week old. They weren't tacky anymore. The poop was dried out a little bit, but you still don't know for sure that buck's not coming through, and it needed a sit.
Yep.
So I sat there, but in the back of my mind, I was thinking, I need to be on that island. And if I was greedy, it was my turn, I would have ran right out there.
Yeah.
And that's where I would have went first. But I knew that island had to be sat. It was my turn. I sat there. And then in the back of my mind, I was thinking, that's going to be the kill island. And I was hoping Joe would pick something else, but Joe knows better.
So I'm going to skirt the edge of this island then, right to the end. It looks like there's some bedding off the point, some dogwood and stuff right off the end. So I'm going to sneak down there. I'm probably not going to do a pre-hunt interview just because I feel like I'm getting in there so tight, but we've got a bunch of wind right now, so that should help. So hopefully you are watching this video as soon as the boy comes in and I slide an arrow through him. So I made it to the tree. I think I can get away with a lot of noise doing this interview because it's so windy, but I think I'm set up pretty good. I've actually got a trail right below me here where they're coming off of another oak island behind me. Hopefully that island doesn't hold them up till dark, but I've got 2 scrapes in here, or 3 scrapes in here. The sign looks awesome. There's fresh poop. You can see where they're scratching and grabbing the acorns. This is by far the best island that I've seen for signs since we started hopping these islands. But I've got bedding all around this point. There's bedding over there. There's bedding back behind me. And the wind is going that way, so I'm set up perfectly here. We'll see what happens. That's the island behind me. Little trail coming into my left. It should come up onto this point here. There's an island back there. So we'll see what happens. I just had a big red coyote go straight into where I think the bedding is. So hopefully that doesn't mess things up for me. We're getting down to that last 45 minutes. I haven't seen anything yet, so. Holy smokes. I think I got that on video. I just shot he's like 140, 150 incher. Three miles back here right now, and this island, there's some grass on the back of it that looked like bedding, and we were looking at it on the map, and we kept bouncing back to these islands here, and oh man, I'm all jacked. But we got back to these islands here, or we're bouncing in these islands, and this one's like the furthest back, and I decided, hey, I'll make the trek, and I got set up in here, got set up perfectly. I just had a coyote come rolling through straight into bedding, and I'm like, man, I'm doomed. And then this toad, I looked down at the island over there, and there's just a frickin' toad standing there. And he comes right in. I come to full draw, and I was full draw on him. I don't know, watch the video back. It'll be probably over a minute. And I started getting nervous, and I was leaning around to try and get around some branches and maybe stuff went in him. And I'm like, just wait, he'll step forward. Sure enough, he stepped forward, and I think I crushed him. The shot looked perfect. I'm going to watch the video back. If the shot looks great, I want to get down, at least get lower, because I'm pretty sure I saw him fall over there. And if it looks good, I'm going to creep over there. But I'm pretty sure I'm good. It looked fantastic. I mean, it was a cake shot. I would say double long heart. So we'll see. Stay tuned here. Alright, so I just got out of the tree here. You can see it behind me. And my arrow is right over there. But I got something better to show you. Look at that rack just sticking up. Holy cow. Let's go take a look at this thing. Look at the size of that thing. Look at the size of that thing. Mass. We got 3 miles to pack this baby out. So this is probably the buck that's been leaving the sign. He's a toad. I'm speechless. But basically there's a bunch of islands behind us. We've been hopping around trying to figure out where all this big sign is coming from. And this is probably the furthest back island here. And I crept in here, got set up on him. Had a coyote run right into the bedding area. I thought I was doomed. Thought it wasn't going to happen. But he came right out and offered me a pretty good shot. I drew back on him. Before he got onto the island I was on, the Oak Island, he actually kind of stood there for a while, and I was at full draw. And I was probably at full draw for a minute, and he finally stepped forward and opened up his chest cavity so I could stick an arrow in him. But what a toad. I said 140s, 150s. I might lie a little bit, but I really don't care. Look at the size of this thing. Check out that arrow. Soaked. This is actually the trail that I thought he would come in on. That's the island he came off of. I believe he came off the back of it because the island itself, I think he would have seen me set up. So
I don't know if you want to cut this part out or not, but I talked to, there was a trail camera on the first island, and I talked to, the guy posted up the picture of us on the internet
Yep,
carrying the buck
yep.
out, and I messaged him, and I just had to know, because, you know, when you got to look at it and learn, go back and see what you learned from it. So I messaged the guy and I said, hey, I have to know, was the buck I shot ever on your trail camera? Because it was a solid trail, there's a scrape right there, and I thought there's no way he wasn't on the camera. He's like, nope, your buck was never on there, but there were a number of other Pope and Youngs on there. So that tells you there were other ones laying out there somewhere, other good
Okay.
ones laying out there somewhere. And I thought that was really interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
that my buck never made it under that tree. But
So one thing, and Rob has brought up this kind of question before, is how did you know where to pick your setups? And you alluded to this a little bit, but exact tree. Like when you're walking onto that island, you know.
Well, I will say that I have brought this up as I've been learning, because there's been last year I had other opportunities to go hunt other properties, and I'm sending Mario Onyx screenshots of like where I'm going, and I'm lost because I'm still learning. And where do you think? You know, because it looks like a sea of trees to me. Now a little bit less now that I've sat through like 2 of Dan's workshops, so, you know, like, and being able to, like, you know, see and talk to you and do that. I feel a little bit better now about that, but, you know, there was a lot I didn't know before that. So yeah, last year, every time I was hunting on my own, it was like, even a property that Mario and I have a really close friend on, it's private property that we can go hunt, and Mario's hunted it a bunch, and he's hunted it a bunch, and it's like, where should I sit up? And, you know, and I end up, you know, picking the tree. You know, Mario's like, I know exactly where you were, but like, yeah, talking about how you're picking those setups, because that seemed to be a crutch for me hunting on my own last year, outside of, you know, hunting with Mario or someone else's.
I can't stress
assistance.
enough that we put a lot of thought into picking the right tree.
Yeah.
I think I remember when you first started hunting with me, you really caught on to that right away. You're like, holy crap, you really put something into it. Because I don't think people realize that I really go into those areas and I'm really studying the wind, how the thermals are going to drop, and exactly what tree I got to be in. And if a buck comes out, it usually comes out where I predicted. I mean, either I see nothing or they come out right underneath me.
Well, we'll get into that later with my hunt, because that's exactly what happened with mine. You know, he said where to set up, and, you know, went out with Mario and it worked. But yeah, I mean, that was a big thing for me, trying to understand that, because it's like, okay, I get this stuff with the equipment and the tactics and stuff, but just actually walking in, because I would have been like, oh, let's sit up on top of this plateau, and then we never would have seen that buck, you know, later on.
So some of the concepts I learned from following Dan around the woods is this concept of, based on the topography, like where is the convergence of trails, or where can you sit where you can see and shoot all potential access to that food source from that bedding area. So, you know, what is going through your mind when you're going into those areas and you're thinking about that?
Yeah, why don't you just tell us, going to that island,
Yep.
how you got to your tree?
how I picked the spot,
Yeah, how you
basically.
got
So as I said before, I skirted the
Flip
downwind
the
side.
coin.
Flip the coin, yeah. Going there. Threw a dart on a map. No, I skirted the downwind side, and I believe, didn't we have a kind of like a south east wind that night? Do you remember? I think it was a southeast
I
wind.
can't remember, but I remember we were considering how you went in because of the wind.
Yeah, and if you could show it on a map real well, if I had gone any further than where I wanted to, so picture, this is your island. This is a topographical map. This is the island, and the bedding is right here. I came up this way, and the wind was going this way. So there was a point where if I went any further, my wind was going to blow into the bedding. So I did have one of those. That buck kind of came in with the wind in his nose. He had a false sense of security to a degree. So that was something, I believe that was the wind, and if it was, that's what I would have looked at, was to make sure I wasn't going too far, that my wind was hitting that bedding. And then exactly what you said, even in hill country we did this, right? It was hard to tell because the leaves were falling and covering up all the trails, but you could kind of see that faint trail, and there's a reason they're walking there, right? So that trail's been made over for many years, right? That trail's been made by many different deer, but there's a reason that this new 2, 3, 4-year-old's going to also walk there. So sometimes just looking for that trail, and like I said, when I got up in the tree, you could see the trail right where he was coming off that island. But I also, when I set up so that I could shoot anything that came off that island on the one side, or I shouldn't call it an island, anything that came out of that bedding to the left of me, or anything that came out of the bedding that was in front of me, I was going to be able to shoot. I set up for that. Some of the shots were going to be a little further, but I wanted to be able to cover the whole area, and in that situation I could.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that makes sense. I've had experience on both sides of the table where you set up, facing just off, maybe in the wrong direction, and the buck comes out. Another lesson I learned for Dan is always face the direction you believe the deer are going to come out of, if you can.
Mm-hmm.
So you have that profile so you can shoot to them, or one of the more important things is you can get the jump on them. So you're not surprised by movement. I have been set up on spots where I had deer come in the exact opposite direction that I expected them to, and then you're doing one of these scenarios where you're trying to move and turn to see what's behind you, and you get busted, and so on and so forth.
Well, and like Dan mentions it in his classes, if you ever have a chance to do a scouting workshop with Dan, take the opportunity to do it, but getting close too. I mean, you talk about that a lot, like going closer than, I mean, how many times in those 2 classes, just alone, probably all your other classes, like, we're like, I didn't think I should get this close to bedding areas and stuff like that, like, maybe Joe saw people would have stopped a lot sooner
Yeah.
than getting as close as Joe was, or as
That's a good
you've gotten. Like, you talk about getting close, and if you're not jumping bucks every now and then, like, you're not getting close.
Yeah, I
enough.
don't think people realize how close we are in the swamp, but we
Yeah.
literally are within 75 yards a lot of the
Yeah,
time.
and
How
you
close
talk
were
about
you
that a
to
lot.
that buck?
I would say around the 80 to 100 yard mark would be my guess.
Yeah, a little further than usual, actually.
Yeah, that's a little further than usual. Yeah,
Yeah.
It was cozy. It was comfortable. Yeah.
So I mean that was a big takeaway I took from your classes this spring that reiterated what I learned hunting with Mario last fall when you talked about where we should sit when I was able to get my first bow buck. If it would have been me, I would have been like, oh, let's sit up here, like 75 yards away. And Mario kept, I'm like, dude, we're getting really close. We're getting really close down here. And then we're sitting in these like small ass little trees, and I'm like, my fat butt is gonna fall out of this tree because it's too thin. But then it ended up working out because we got close, and so that's a big takeaway I keep getting from you all the time, is that getting close to everything, getting close to that bedding area. So
Being in the right position. A lot of times, you go in there, it's a forest of trees, there's one tree you need to be in. A lot of the time. Maybe 2 that you get away with.
I've got spots back home where you need to belly crawl through a little opening to make sure you don't get seen. That way you can get to the tree you need to. And sometimes that's what it takes. And those bucks are set up because they know if a predator goes through that opening, they're going to pick them off, right? So you got to kind of do what you got to do.
well, and you were just talking about that at a property you were just on the other day. You were standing in a buck's bed,
Yeah.
and you looked up, and it's our friend. It's his private property, but Mario could see the bottom of his lone wolf platform and the top of his lone wolf stick if he stood up in the bed.
Yeah,
You
so
know.
I think that's
He
that's
could
another
see
thing with
it clear as day from the buck's bed, standing there.
the advantage of doing some spring scouting and getting into these beds and actually sitting in them and looking out with wind to your back to where the predominant wind would be, and actually physically pretending that you're the buck in the scenario, and how would you think about being in there? What are your escape routes? How would you access it and exit it? In that particular case, we're talking, you've got a thick wooded area, and then literally a wall of buckthorn, because this property is getting overgrown with buckthorn. Then it drops down into swamp grass and a mixture of swamp grass and dogwood. The first section where it hit mature trees, now there's still some ash out there, and there's some other undergrowth trees. The first tangly undergrowth tree had a cluster of 3 beds with rubs in it. And you could literally sit down in that, and you could just look over the top of the dogwood, and then look over the top of the buckthorn, and there's a tree stand, my friend had set up about 70 yards out, and I could see right as the crow flies. So what do you learn from that? You think about, well, if you're accessing that spot and you're coming into it, like Dan mentioned earlier, if you get up too high on the horizon, there's movement there. So maybe in that case, the 25-foot rule doesn't apply. You're only going to get 10
That's the
feet
whole thing.
off the
When I
ground.
climb a tree, I'm facing the bedding area. I'm putting sticks on the tree. I'm using the tree as a blockade, as camouflage. I'm trying to hide behind the tree.
Yeah.
I'm going up the tree, and I'm looking forward, so I'm looking, how high can I get? And there's a point where I have to put that stand up, because if I go any higher, they're gonna see me over the brush.
Yeah.
And now your friend's property, his stand, he didn't take that into consideration. He got to as high as he wanted with cover and,
Yep.
and blah, 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 and doesn't understand the bedding,
Right.
you know, which is most people.
Yeah. I've actually seen guys on the site, a couple guys posted a video of this, and I thought it was kind of interesting. I mean, they were bringing their family along, and he had his daughter along with him, and they played this little game where he would go in, find a bed, and then his daughter would sit in the bed, and then he would walk away as far as he could and get in proximity from when she couldn't see him anymore, and then he would mark where trees and positions were, you know, and it's just fun because it's another way to just analyze how you need to enter that area. Another spot that I hunted in the early season, I didn't have any success. I saw a small doe and a buck, but was a section where it had a swamp that was next to a river, and then there was a CRP field behind the swamp. Now the one thing with this that I never did, that I wish I would have did, that CRP field joined up to a cornfield that held corn for most of the year. And you and I drove past that, we never hunted it. But I wish I would have, because the time that I hunted it, there was actually multiple beds. That CRP grass was very high, and there was clusters of those willow trees that were out in the middle of that. So I looked at it and I almost treated it just as if I would treat cattails, because there was very tall, you know, CRP grass, and then there was thick clusters of these willow trees, these willow bushes rather. Well, what do you think I found when I walked out to those clusters of willow bushes?
Beds.
Multiple beds. And a couple that were pretty sizable with fresh poop in there and sign. Now, if I would have bet, you know, I ended up that night, I set up just off because the wind was kind of goofy and I was half scouting, half hunting, but I set up on the ground. But I never got a chance to go back there and hunt it, because I think what was happening is because of the predominant wind, those deer were bedding out in that CRP, and they were getting up and they were walking to that cornfield and feeding, because that was the closest proximity when they weren't being pressured. Now that particular spot gets a ton of pressure, so I'm sure after a while, you know, they busted out of there and vacated. But there's probably a window there where if you get in there early enough before there's a lot of human pressure, that they're going to be bedding out in that CRP, and if there's a food source close by like that, you could set up, there's a fence row, you know, in between the CRP and the cornfield, you could set up and maybe have some success. But now I know to think differently about a scenario like that, where you've got bedding, you know, a food source, and where you can set up in transition to that.
And maybe one thing we should bring up too is the early season factor, and what a big deal that can be, because as you mentioned, you kind of explained it perfect. You picture all these velvet bucks you see out in the fields all summer. That kind of does. I mean, if you've got a season that opens up September 15th, that kind of bleeds into the season a little bit. And like, I shot that buck an hour and a half before dark. He probably had not smelled humans yet.
Right.
I'm gonna guess to say that. And he was on a summer pattern. Some of those big slobs back home by me too, we see the same thing real early. You'll see them on the cameras, you'll see them up moving early, those big pigs. When they don't smell that human scent yet, it's just like summer. They're careless, they make stupid decisions. That's probably kind of what you saw with your early season hunt.
Yeah. They're in those patterns and they're used to coming to those spots and they're comfortable.
You haven't had problems all year.
Yeah,
all
September
summer.
15th and October 1st are very, very different time of the year.
Yeah, and it's where people like in Michigan and stuff, a lot of times don't understand what we're talking about when we're talking early season, because they start October 1st. And actually, as much as we talk about it being pressure, a lot of times it's just timing. They're just a whole different deer in October than they are in early September. Their whole attitude and everything.
They got different initiatives and different things they want to do during that time of the year. And it is interesting though, like there's spots that, you know, I drive by or go out and check that consistently you see nice bucks in these fields all summer long, and you see these batcher groups. And I, through interviewing different people and talking to different people, you know, you begin to learn that the guys that are getting it done time and time again, they're logging all that stuff, and they're patterning those mature animals in those scenarios that they're talking about, and a lot of times they're having that success in that first week based on those patterns, because those bucks aren't changing.
Not to mention, how many times have you ran into somebody whose stands don't change at the times of the year? I mean, there's places I hunt early season, there's places I hunt lull time, there's places I hunt mid-October, there's places I hunt rut, there's places I hunt gun, there's places I hunt late season,
Yep.
and they don't really coexist.
Yeah.
They're where the deer are at that time of the year. And I think you see these guys, they just put up a stand where, you know, and that's their stand. And they're rotating through them or something, you know.
And I think that's probably why we're seeing, people are catching on to that. They're seeing the success you could have with getting mobile
Yeah.
and moving around, and actually it's, for as long as I'm able to do it, you know, like Dan said about when you get out in those swamps and you're packing stuff around, your age starts catching up with you. But for as long as I can do it, I'm gonna continue to do it that way, because it is actually more fun. To each hunt out, it's almost, you're presenting yourself with a new challenge or a new adventure, and you know, you don't know exactly what's gonna happen, because you're sitting in maybe that virgin spot, or you're in a spot that you've had success in previous years, you scouted, and now it's the first time you've been in there.
And that's what's great about it, is every time I go out there, I truly believe I'm going into a setup where I'm gonna kill something big. And then when I fail, the next setup, I'm going into something, I'm gonna kill something big. You know, and you can believe in it when you're going into something fresh, when you have a plan, when you're, you know what I'm saying?
Yep, yep.
And despite age, you guys are still pretty hard to keep up with in the swamp, so.
Do you have any other good early season encounters?
Yeah, back home I did. I mean, I really didn't get any video of it. The reason I didn't film my Wisconsin tag, I shot the one in Minnesota, so I was happy with that. I kind of got that off my chest. And I had one specific buck that I wanted to chase around at home. He was a buck that I had watched for a few years. And I actually, kind of what you mentioned, I didn't know where he was hanging out, but in the summer I would catch him out in a bean field, and I started doing actually some summer scouting, and where he was coming from, I just kind of started pounding it in the summer, because I figured I'm better off at least knowing what the terrain looks like, where he's maybe hanging out. If I can jump him once, I'm just going to get out of there and stay out of there. And I think I overdid it. I hunted opening night. I had, I don't know, a 120-inch buck come out. It happened so fast. I sent an arrow over his back. I'm glad I did, because that's not really what I wanted to shoot. But then back home, we had a rain come through. It was a hell of a rain. And I went through that whole property. This was when the season finally opened. I went through that whole property and zigzagged through anything where I could cut a track, anything, any trail, and it was clear that he wasn't in there. And I said, okay, so he's not in here. Where's the next place that I've seen him in previous years? So on the particular hunt, it was, like, I don't know, it was 3 or 4 hours before dark, and I started running a transition edge of a swamp. And I cut some good sign going into the swamp. There were deer in there. I was running low on time. I was sloppy. And I got in there and I could see the trail that this deer went in on in the morning. But I said, nope, that's what I scouted last winter. That's where I need to be. And that was my mistake. He actually did. He relocated probably 1.5 to 2 miles from the first spot where I was scouting him in the morning. I think that was one thing that caught me too when he did come through. I remember looking at him. This is kind of something I brought up on the beast lately. I had, you ever get it where the sun's kind of setting and your eyes are adjusting for the bright light, but you're trying to see the low light stuff in front of you. I had that deal kind of going on. I was looking at him binoculars and I was like, shit, it's him. And I should have had an arrow in him. He came through. He cut my scent where I cut in. He came back. He didn't know where I was, and he actually started coming straight at me and just stuffed himself into some really thick brush. You could hear all the brushes clanking on his antlers, and he was 20 yards below me. And I sat there till it was blacker than hell. And I was like, I gotta get down, and I figured he'd blow out of there, go tearing out of there, and I took my whole stand down, packed up all my sticks, flashlight and everything. He never tore out of there, and I slipped out the other way. He just stood there and watched me in the dark. So that was, I spent my whole season trying to chase him around in that swamp. He was in there for a while. I eventually booted him out. I don't know if he's in there right now or not. And I ended up, I even chased him around. I thought I was chasing him around in there with the shotgun and the muzzleloader, and I ended up shooting a 130 class buck with the muzzleloader in there. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But, and another thing too, I guess to tie with that, in these swamps, my swamps aren't a lot like Dan's swamps. I have a lot of cedar swamps, tamarack swamps, and this is something you pointed out, even in your swamps out here, when a big buck shows up, there's certain places he's going to be, and there's certain places he's not going to be.
Yep.
And even in these cedar swamps and tamarack swamps, I'm learning it, there's certain areas you can just cross them off the list. You know, you go in there, you'll see rubs, you got your 1.5s, your 2.5s, they just love to tear things up, make them look nice, but that's not where they're hanging out. And it takes time, right? You maybe even
Yeah.
have to run a camera and let it soak so you can learn what it's about and just go hunt something else. But when you find where they're hanging out, where I shot the 130 class was the exact same place. I actually picked up this big boy shed from the year before in that swamp. They have their little haunches.
Yeah, I think about it,
Raccoon.
there's a swamp over by me, it's 3 miles long. It's all tamarack and dogwood and stuff, and
Yep.
every time a huge buck gets shot in that swamp, it's the same area,
Yep.
that whole 3 miles. They
There's
got the
something about
spots where they go, and you know, people will always tell me, well, there's beds everywhere. Yeah, there's beds everywhere, the big bucks aren't everywhere. It's like a whole different animal. They're gonna be in the right position based on
Yep.
wind, based on, you know, cover and everything else. I mean, they're gonna take the best position they can.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you could probably say the same thing, but every truly mature buck I've shot, and I'm not talking 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, but every truly mature buck I've shot or jumped or whatever, they were in spots where nobody was. Nobody was going, nobody was
Right.
screwing around there. I mean, it's not the spot where somebody goes through it once or twice a month, it's a spot where nobody is.
Right.
And those spots are out there, you just gotta find
I
them.
preach that all the time, but you know, you still gotta hunt the other spots, but what do we end up getting in those spots is usually the nice buck. The mature ones always come out of those spots where nobody goes,
Yeah, yeah,
or where you wouldn't expect them.
yeah.
I had another hunt I wouldn't mind talking about. I got an opportunity to go down to western Wisconsin and hunt a small farm that I'd never hunted before. Got access to it. So, western Wisconsin, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so how do you look at that? How did you decide where to go? Were you looking at a map, or what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, so I focused in on the map. I looked at this property. This property was basically a giant plateau. The top of this plateau literally had a 25-acre section of corn. So it was a sea of corn. But all the way around this was a very thick wooded transition. So it was bordered by 2 bean fields, 1 bean field and 1 CRP field that had a tree line transition. And then the west edge of it had, what I found, I didn't know at the time, had a huge outcropping of oaks and some apple trees. And then this particular corner that I was very interested in, the southwest corner, had the typical transition lines we look for. So it had points coming off on that steep incline. It was like a 60-degree incline. And right where that military crest is, I'm like, that's where there's going to be a buck. So I had it in my mind when I accessed this property. It was a little bit weird. I had to access on the north side where the farmhouse was. And the best way to access it was to go behind the farmhouse and start walking the edge, that west edge of that transition. Now the wind was blowing from the west, so it's like cutting across my face as I'm walking into this thing. So as I got into it, because it was early October when I finally got down there to hunt it, I got up into the section where the oaks were, and I was like, holy cow, I wish I would have been able to hunt this in early season, because everything was completely browsed over. You could see where there were multiple deer coming into this area. They had browsed all the acorns. There was multiple oak trees there. The apple tree was actually picked dry. There was 1 apple that was half eaten on the ground. The rest, there wasn't even a sign that it was an apple tree. They just completely hammered it. So I started getting a little more excited. I made my way up to the edge of the wooded transition in the cornfield. So basically it made a corridor that was running directly south. So I hopped into that corridor and I started looking for sign. So I was looking for, obviously, any scrapes, any tracks coming out of that corridor, all focusing in on working my way towards that southwest corner of the property. So here's another lesson learned about how close do you get, how close do you not get. So I'm getting within 150 yards of the corner, and I start to see rubs. Now, not big rubs, but, you know, rubs nonetheless of 1.5-year-old, 2-year-old buck. I get a little bit further, I see a fresh scrape. I see areas in the corn where it looked like deer had walked through and knocked down some of the stalks. Could have been turkey as well. So I decided to keep pushing on. Well, remember how you spoke of seeing like a corridor or a trail where, so I get within 50 yards of that corner. And there was a nice scrape and a tree that had a licking branch that was down on it. And I was spying along like, can I set up there? Can I set up there? You know, I should probably get in here. I'm getting kind of close. And I looked literally like 10 yards ahead of me. And I said, well, that tree there is the one I need to sit in because I can shoot better to the trail. So I literally took 5 more steps And right as I looked into that southwest corner, there was a thicket of like prickly ash that was just on between the corn, open corridor, the prickly ash, and you could see this trail bored through like someone took a brush hog and went right back in there. I took 5 more steps and this buck got up. Right on that, as it dips down, he got up, he turned and looked at me, turned, danced right off the...
And so often, in those field areas where you got open areas like that, when they're not getting hunted that much, they're sitting right on that edge, watching that axis. So the best thing you could do, and it would have been hard for you because you're traveling so far,
Yeah,
would have been to watch that before you hunted it.
yep,
Because you would have saw him got up and you'd go, that's where I need to be. Right here, here, or there. And you still might have had a chance.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it was a lesson learned because that buck, I can almost guarantee based on the tracks that I saw and the sign that I saw, was getting up in daylight, and he was walking with the wind, crosswind. He was walking right down that corridor, and he was feeding on the corn, and he was feeding on the acorns that were on the oaks that were in that corridor, and he was taking that. So I ended up actually looping, around and hunting downwind of where he got up. I got set up. I actually had a deer that blew at me while I was setting up, which very possibly could have been him because he was already on his feet. So I hunted that then, hunted it one more time and saw a bunch of turkeys and like 3 doe and a coyote, but never had an encounter with that buck again. But now it's in my registry. Like I know if I go there to hunt it again, I know exactly that if the oaks are dropping, it's definitely worth a sit. B, I'm gonna call the farmer ahead of time and say, hey, is there any apples in your apple tree this year? Is it having a good crop? Because it's worth a sit in that spot as well. And then C, just knowing proximity of how close I can get to that corner where they're bedding. And this is a spot it's got pressure around it. It's got other farmhouses. But from the map, you could just tell that was the one spot where they're probably honing in on. So it was a cool hunt. It was worth a couple sits, and I got an encounter with a decent buck.
What time of the year was that?
That was the 12th of October, yeah,
Okay.
if I look at my journal, yeah.
I'm around over here.
No idea.
Make we're going to walk by him and
Yeah, you better not.
get him. He doesn't have his tail exposed.
Yeah, you don't look happy.
What are you doing?
Oh, you dropped your phone.
Caught me a coon. He looks like a big ornery guy, don't he?
You keep him away from me, that's all I know.